knew that I would die if I didn't.
Ruth nos acompaña hoy a contestar preguntas súper importantes.
Gold standard of accurately attuned parents are accurately attuned 30% of the time.
Y si ser buen padre solo requiere hacerlo bien el 30% del tiempo,
The Epstein Files.
¿qué pasa cuando el abusador es al mismo tiempo tu fuente de validación?
Being desired sexually makes me feel wanted.
¿Cómo es que un embarazo estresante puede darnos hijos agresivos?
And the rest of the time, it's the dance of rupture and repair.
Esta mujer estuvo 40 años de su vida en terapia. Bebía 1 litro de alcohol todos los días y tardó 6 años en tratamiento antes de comenzar a hacer el primer cambio. Hoy es una de las voces más importantes en el mundo del trauma y viene con mucha compasión hacia los padres que consideran que fracasaron, a los hijos que fueron ignorados y a sí misma. Porque Ruth nos enseña que no importa cuánto trabajo interno hagas, esa parte pequeña y frágil que reside dentro de ti siempre te va a acompañar a donde sea que vayas. Personal, soy extremadamente escéptica de la industria del trauma y cómo se ha comercializado mucho de ese dolor a partir de los best-selling books como El cuerpo lleva la cuenta o El legado del trauma. Hoy en día, todo se conoce como una respuesta al trauma. Ruth Cohn es una de las pocas personas que guardo en mi repertorio de personas a escuchar con mucho respeto. Espero que disfrutes de este episodio tanto como yo disfruto aprender de ella, de su compasión y de su energía tan preciosa que nos acompaña el día de hoy.
First of all, I really want to tell you how much of a pleasure it is to have you here. Oxford 2024, you mentioned 3 Ps: paralysis, procrastination, and passivity.
So many children who suffer from that are blamed and they're told that they're lazy. It's so not true. This is not about what you did, it's about what you didn't get.
Somebody that puts this as precise must be someone that really sat with that discomfort of having to deal with those 3 Ps. So my first question would be not so much on the expert, but the little you. I would really like to know, how is she doing today? After all this work of trauma, after all this knowledge you have, how is the little you doing today?
Well, what a lovely question, Thea. Let me see how I can answer you. Well, yesterday I had a lot of tech problems. I was trying to do some work and I could not stay connected to the person I was supposed to be talking to. So I kind of came in with a little bit of apprehension and nervousness about, is it going to work? Is it going to, because what happened yesterday was I wasted a lot of time trying to connect and ultimately had to postpone the whole thing anyway because I couldn't get a connection. And I didn't know why. And technical stuff is so not my thing. So I came into it like that little girl who was scared. Oh God, I'm going to fail. I'm going to forget what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to, get lost. All these things that I couldn't count on my brain to kind of get me where I was trying to get. So I was a little bit wound up about that today, and I kept telling myself, Cynthia, she knows you, she's going to be there. I still had that kind of nervousness that was very familiar, because as a little girl, I was always uncertain. I was always afraid that my own resources would fail me, and without them, out there by myself. So that's what kicks in for me. And of course, in you, everything's working, great connection. So I feel great relief. Also, I was so excited to see you because you're very dear to me, very precious to me, and I don't have any children or grandchildren, but people like you are really very, very precious to my heart. So I love getting news from you and your dog, your goats, your chickens, and whatever you have growing or blooming or snowing. I just love to hear about that. Little girl part of me is like, oh boy, I get to see someone I really love. That's my answer, my long-winded answer to your sweet question. Thank you for starting with that.
Well, it's always important to go back to it because I don't think that there's a therapist on the planet that didn't start trying to understand themselves and really being driven by the pain. I really don't think we're just trying to understand and prove that our pain was real, in all honesty.
Yeah.
I always like to come back behind the scientists that we need to prove that what I'm saying is true. I always like to come back to where it all started and what really drives the passion behind moving and knowledge and science. And it's something that I find very interesting that I'm currently dealing with, and maybe I would at some point resemble your greatness. But did you ever get insecure about helping others? That your resources were going to be enough? When did you see, I think I'm ready to help others? And whether you experience a lot of, let's say, not imposter syndrome, but like, am I really equipped to help others kind of feeling?
I'll tell you the truth, still feel that way. I still feel that way sometimes. And a couple of things about working with neglect. The child of neglect is ferociously self-reliant. So they come to us, if they come to us at all, they come to us very help resistant. They don't want to need us because they don't want to need anyone. So one of the characteristics of neglect, if you'll forgive me, and I am a child of neglect too, but the child of neglect very often is a know-it-all. And I'll tell you why. Because the child of neglect has nowhere to turn, no one to ask, so they have to find their own answers. When I was growing up, there was no ChatGPT, there was no Google, there was no internet, so I had to hustle around trying to find my answers to questions, things I didn't understand, which was most things. And so I spent a lot of time in the library by myself reading books, but you find your answers to the questions, whatever they may be, and then you hold on to these answers like a lifeline. It's true because I found it in a book and I know that it's true, and so it's true. So the child of neglect, now I'm back to my clients. So the child of neglect comes into the room. They know everything. So what that means is anything that I might have to say or to contribute, default is to reject it. And their default is to kind of assume, you don't know anything, I know everything, so just back, I'll tell you what I need and you do that. And some of them who are really kind of powerful characters, or maybe they evoke someone from my own childhood, are successful in hitting that nerve in me that is uncertain about what I do know. I have people who are really smart people, really intelligent in the school kind of intelligence, and people with fancy degrees and fancy schools, much fancier than I've got. And so they know everything and they can hit that nerve in me like, God, I don't have a fancy school after my name. I don't have all those letters after my name. And so they hit that nerve. I don't know enough, or I don't know anything. Or everything that, I've written books about suddenly is out the window, and this person is making me feel like, not making me feel, but they're evoking that feeling that I had so much of, which is, I'm not good enough, I'm not worth anything, I don't know anything, and so I start to shrink. This even happens now, not all the time, not very often, but some people can really hit the nerve, which is why when we work with trauma and neglect, absolutely have to keep doing our own work, because if we don't, we're either going to collapse into that uncertainty, or else we're going to get triggered in the room with the client, which is really dangerous or can be really negative for them, or simply the transference gets contaminated with my stuff and their stuff, and then it becomes confusing for everyone. I would say, if we're honest and if we have humility, those feelings go with us through the lifespan, because memory can create alternate pathways, but we can never quite extinguish it completely. And the nature of trauma is not that we remember, but we relive it. And so if the memory is not extinguished completely, where our reserves are low, if I'm underslept, I'm overworked, I'm tired, my self-care is not, then I'm more prone to get triggered. I hate that word. I like to say activated instead of triggered, because triggered reminds me of gun violence, and I don't want to even think about that. We have to do our own work so our own material doesn't get stimulated by the client. When you talk about that uncertainty, that is my old childhood material.
Would really like to circle back to that point. You say that when we read something in a book, or where we see a theory that just matches perfectly with our lived experience of the world, we hang on to it as if for dear life. When is it enough? Because sometimes I see that there's so much information about trauma. Everything is starting to become a trauma response. When is it more harmful to have the knowledge of trauma than it is helpful? In which cases do you see?
Great question. Great question. What I would say to that, what I have done over my long career in trauma, the PTSD diagnosis got named in 1980. That's not very long ago, historically. 1980 got the PTSD diagnosis. I got my license in 1990. I started working in 1988, clinical work. So over the years, there's been more and more and more, recognition that trauma exists. When I first came into the field, nobody knew anything, so I had to fly all over the place to get any training at all. We didn't have internet. We didn't have any of these sort of mass available. So there wasn't the problem that you're naming now. What I have learned to do over the years is I have 2 or 3 people that I think of as trusted counsel, whose opinion really carries weight with people who have science, people who have experience, people who appear, at least to me, walk the walk. People use trauma, the word trauma, to refer to their bad day. Very simple. And trauma is when the stimulus is greater than what the organism is designed to process in its customary way. So if you have an experience that blows your nervous system offline in such a way that the prefrontal cortex goes offline, and all got is the limbic flight freeze, that constitutes trauma. When you're in trauma, you can't think or speak. That is literally speechless terror. That's not a bad day. A bad day is when you get, mad or activated about something. Trauma is when the brain, it gets hijacked. So instead of going the usual route where the prefrontal cortex has the opportunity to regulate the limbic system, so your thought can manage and regulate your affect. That is the typical way we process experience. Then it goes through the regular channels of going through the hippocampus, getting filed, getting processed, joining the autobiographical narrative, gets lost as your personal history. Trauma, that does not happen. The prefrontal goes offline. We can't think, we can't speak. So you've got all this raw emotion, sensation, sensory experience, the imagery, maybe sound, maybe smell, and it doesn't get integrated, doesn't go through the normal channels, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, autobiographical narrative. That all doesn't happen, but rather remains raw until we settle down. And when we settle down, we may or may not remember what happened, because memory process, memory logging, and memory storage go through the ordinary processing sequence.
Believe that nowadays with so much information, it's quite interesting to see how that is shaping our lenses as well. That something like shouting to your child won't traumatize the child. You do that on a regular basis, chronically, of course that will traumatize the child. But if you snap once, maybe that effect, if there's the proper repair afterwards, shouldn't really create much damage.
Well, that is a really interesting, it brings to mind so many questions, because all brains are not alike. And partly the reason, the only reason I'm not a mother is because I knew when I was 5 years old and I looked into my mother's traumatized face and I thought, I will never be a mother, because I never want anyone to feel like this. I did not believe I could do better. And so I haven't become a mother, and I have no regrets about that, but I'm really keen on training and teaching and preparing parents to be for all the ways that they can give their child a better start in the world. And what made me think about this is that there are some babies that have a brain that is more sensitive. And so what I recently learned from Alan Shore, and this is really relevant to me now because, for example, dear friend Alexandra Chen, who works in Gaza, she works with traumatized children. The mothers, when they're pregnant, are living in a war zone. So the mothers are in trauma all the time. I'm very aware of binary language, male, female. So much of the research is in binary language. I want to tell your audience that I'm speaking of the whole spectrum of genders and sexualities when I talk, and that I'm working with a poverty of research, which is very binary, male, female. Anyways, here's what Alan Shore taught me recently. When the pregnant mother is living in a situation of chronic stress, or even, periodic or ongoing stress, what that means is the mother's under stress, she's pregnant, she gets activated, her body starts pumping stress hormones, cortisol. The cortisol permeates the placenta of the pregnant mother. Placenta, of course, is how the fetus is nourished, and is the nourishment of the fetus that feeds the developing brain. And one thing about cortisol and the developing fetus brain is that cortisol, with the developing brain, there are certain critical periods where there's more growth at one time. Cortisol stimulates more connections, more growth in the right amygdala. That means that this fetus is growing an enlarged amygdala in utero. So what happens when the infant, or when the fetus becomes an infant, it's born, and it comes out into the world? Well, child has an enlarged right amygdala, which means the threat response, what the right amygdala is. The right amygdala is the alarm bell of the brain. This infant is born with a heightened sensitivity to threat. In effect, that child is born scared. So now we go back to what you were saying earlier. That child that is born scared is going to be more vulnerable when the mother or the parent or whoever the person is in some way or other activating their fear response, their activation, their reactivity is going to be greater than someone who, say, didn't develop in utero in a war zone. What this means is, first of all, you have to stop the wars because too many people, pregnant others, how to say it, their infants are getting permeated with cortisol. They have no chance. They're born in that way. So we have to stop the wars. But also take people who don't necessarily live in a literal war zone, but say they have a really stressful marriage or they have a lot of unprocessed trauma, so they're pumping a lot of cortisol all the time. A pregnant person, their child is at risk for a hypersensitive nervous system and a more reactive when they come into the world. I want to get people, when they haven't had their child yet, actually begin to educate parents. And this is what Alexandra and I are going to do a workshop together in Boston this year, where she's going to talk about the work with the children, and I'm going to talk about how do we prepare the parents, which means we have to impress upon them how important it is to do their own trauma work and to work on the relationships, like the marriages or the partnerships that give rise to these children. What is the environment that the kids are growing up in? Are the parents fighting? Is the other parent there? Who's helping with the child's, so that the mother isn't overwhelmed, or the parent, whoever's taking care of that child, pumping cortisol all the time, because it continues after birth. So back to your point, and I have one other thing to say about it, and then I'll stop. So I want to prepare parents in this way. The other thing I wanted to say to your parents, or to your listeners who are parents, Ed Tronick teaches us, and all the attachment research people teach us, is the best of the attuned parents. The gold standard of attuned parents, of good enough, of accurately attuned parents, are accurately attuned, listen to this, 30% of the time. Less than 1/3. So your people, your listeners, who are parents who are worried about every time they've yelled at their kids, 30% is the gold standard. And the rest of the time, it's the dance of rupture and repair. Learning repair is the most valuable thing in the world for anyone who wants to have, all of us, any kind of relationship in our lifetime. We have to know repair. So now I'm going to be quiet for a while and let you talk.
30% is a very low number. I'm really thinking that I moved into another phase of my life where I actually want to comfort parents now because of how badly they've been scrutinized because of the trauma-informed communities. How can the parents start grieving the parent they thought they were? Because I think nowadays, just kind of older children are kind of coming forward with what they thought their childhoods were. They were well informed. We have ChatGPT that tells you, yeah, your parents are violating your boundaries and this and that, and it's only self-validating. But I really want to comfort parents, in addition to what you said, that only 30% of the parents are actually extremely good attuned to their children. How can they start to grieve the parent they thought they were?
That is a great question. First of all, I would wonder, what is the grief they need to do about their own parents. Because one of the things I talk about a lot with my survivor clients, my neglect and trauma survivor clients, is what I call the Bermuda Triangle. And the Bermuda Triangle is where we have this true shipwreck feeling inside. And it's like a storm that, leaves no traces, no wreckage, but it's roiling around inside, and it's very hard to make sense out of it. And the 3 points of the triangle are grief, anger, and guilt. And we've got all 3, and they tend to be at the same time. So we're having to manage all 3, because some of where they failed, or they missed, or they went wrong with their own child may very well have to do with what they didn't get, or what was going on in their lives when they did those things that they feel regret. What was going on? Is there anger at someone else for what was happening, as well as grief, as well as shame, as well as guilt? To make room for all 3, because my guess is that much of what they think of as their mistakes is about what they didn't get, including, did they have enough help when children were small? Was there enough support for taking care of those children? There might be grief about that. Maybe the partner was gone. Maybe the partner was either working, which may have been necessary, may have been absent, which may have been something to be angry about, or may have been, fighting in some distant war. I've had clients who their father wasn't there when they were born because he was off fighting in the Vietnam War. It was a horrible war that nobody would want to be in. The father was gone when she was born. Then he comes back with PTSD when she's young. The mother is living with all that and trying to take care of the child. So then this child has kind of an impoverished childhood about what she's not getting, but her parents did the best they could. So she grows up, she has her own kids, and she's not perfect. So what we want to look at is, what is the story of these parents who are feeling so aggrieved about their own parenting? One other thing that I will say is, I was talking with a Native American woman, an indigenous woman who comes from Canada, and she was telling me how her people have a very different model of parenting, where it's not only one person that is responsible for the child. You know how they say it takes a village to raise a child? Well, in her tribe, that is exactly what happens. The whole, group is raising that child. That child is held and mirrored and resonating to more than one brain. And that's a really interesting idea for me with kind of conservative attachment standpoint. It's a wider view that we have to have, especially as our view of gender and parenting is widening. So many facets to this grief about not being good enough. And I would take it back to their own grief about their own infant and what that child didn't get. Because it's very hard to give what we never got until there's repair. That's what happens in the therapy that you and I offer. If we're good, if we're humble, and if we have the opportunity and the time, we're helping them learn to do the repair and have a healing attachment with someone, with a caregiver who sees them, who hears them, who feels them, and they feel. And so they begin to get those capacities.
I think that's something very interesting about the therapeutic relationship that I think Ed Tronick speaks a lot about, that what truly does the repair is the therapeutic relationship, because there is a relationship with the therapist that it's maybe she didn't react as strongly as your once parents did when you made a mistake. Maybe it was fine. Maybe you talked about it. And those new experiences do tend to, over time, tend to have a whole deal of repair done in the brain.
Absolutely. I want to underline, which is over time. Because I had the privilege and the good fortune of having a brilliant therapist in 1978, if you can imagine, before your parents were even dreaming of you. I started my therapy and I was really in bad shape. Literally, I went to therapy 4 times a week because I could not hold on to the connection from one day to the next. Every day I felt like I was starting all over again, and I truly believed about myself. Nobody could hold me in mind. Nobody would remember me if I wasn't in their sight. And I certainly hold on to the connection. So every day I'd come in and I'd start all over again from scratch. At that time, I was constantly wanting to give my therapist things so she would have some reminder of me, because I could not imagine that she could keep me in mind when I wasn't there. It took me, from the time I started going 4 days a week, and at that time I was working as a waitress. I went to work, I went to therapy. I went to work, I went to therapy. All my money went straight to her, and that was okay. But even that way, 4 times a week, took about 6 years before it started to change. So when you said over time, I stayed with her. I started with her in 1978. I was 23. And I ended therapy with her in 2018. She was 89. Now she's 95? And she's still living. And she always says, I raised you from a pup. She did. But I was with her for 40 years. I was with her. I went 4 days a week for about 6 years or so. And then I started going down to 3 times a week and 2 times a week and 1 time a week. And I always said, I'm going to keep coming here till you shut the door. And I did. By the time I ended, I could hold on to the relationship with her pretty darn well. And I stopped suffering and being so angry and so jealous of her biological children, because I could honestly believe that she kept me inside and that I mattered. But it took me a long time. And she taught me repair.
23.
What?
You were 23 when you started going to therapy. And you did nothing but work and go to therapy.
For years. And my 2 sisters, they had houses, had husbands, they had families. And I didn't have anything to show for it, except when we came out of it, I had me, and I have me now. So it took a while. Like you said, it takes as long as it takes.
Question, what drove you back then? Because it's not, you were very young. At 23, people are having boyfriends, going out, getting distracted. I really need to know, what drove you? What drove the car back then to push through? Because it's not also a comfortable place to be at, like disclosing all the pain. It does take not only courage, but discipline. And of course, you were saying all my money was going into her. What drove you to make that a priority?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's a long story. I'll make it short. I truly felt it wasn't even conscious. It was do or die. I knew that I would die if I didn't. There was no alternative. I didn't even think about why I did it. It was like my feet took me there every day. One thing I will add is I had an almost fatal eating disorder. I drank alcoholically by the time I was 13. So I was self-regulating in these really self-destructive ways. When I started with her, I'm not proud of this. I've been sober now for 1983. So I've been sober for 43 years. From 78 till 83, I was drinking, and in liters, it was more than a liter of straight bourbon every night by myself. And I was about the size I am now. That's a lot of alcohol. She had the wisdom to know without the alcohol, I would probably die because I couldn't stand the pain. And she also knew, she had the wisdom to know when it was starting to kill me. And then she got in there and said, you got to stop this. And then I went to Alcoholics Anonymous twice a day. It's again, same thing. My feet took me there. 7 in the morning, 7 in the evening. Every day I went to AA. 4 days a week I went to therapy. My feet just took me there. I knew I would die if I didn't. I was in that bad of shape. And so what drives you? Well, what they say in AA about getting sober is really the only two things that drive someone to really do the work is pain and fear. If you're suffering enough, or if you're scared enough, seat of pants to seat of chair, you will stay there. Nothing else really does it, as far as I'm concerned. People come to us if they're in enough pain or if they're scared enough. And it takes a lot of humility to stay with it. And believe me, there's plenty of time when I know my clients and I know myself. I thought, ugh, why am I doing this? And feeling hopelessness. And hopeless is part of the neglect profile, because the under-firing brain is prone to ennui, this feeling like nothing matters. What is the point? Why bother? You get tired and you get sick of spending all the money, and I see my sisters with their houses and their children and their, all that stuff and everything you're supposed to have that I didn't have. But now I have me, and I'd much rather have what I have than what they got. And my life, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it took what it took to get here. And so I got a later start in really enjoying my life. But wow, the life I get to have can't beat it. And every day I say to my husband, wow, one thing I say is I'm so glad we live indoors, because so many people live on the street, certainly where I live. But I'm so grateful for my life. And it takes what it takes to get here. And if you're scared enough and in enough pain and desperation, I don't know any other reason why people stay.
It might be a very stupid question. Why not just let go?
Why not? And, some people do. I don't know the difference. I can understand why people just don't want to anymore. And believe me, I thought about it plenty in my life, in my efforts, if you can call it that, to not give up. Almost died of anorexia. There was a period when I was 13 when I could not walk from my bed to the bathroom. I had a little bell by my bed, and I had to ring the bell so that somebody could come and help me go to the bathroom, because that's the point I got myself to with anorexia. So I was very close to the edge. Similarly, I did the same with alcohol. It's by the grace of God that I didn't die. So your question, some of it I think is grace, because what somebody else might have done in those circumstances may very well have ended it for them. Somehow, for whatever reason, probably so I'd be able to be here long enough to sit here with you and the people that are listening to us and do something for the world. But I can't explain it in any kind of logical terms.
I think it also has a little bit to do with temperament. There's certain temperaments that already come very, very resilient towards life, that it's just push, 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 push until I get to the other side. I think in order to do the trauma repairing work that it's required, it's going to take a really long time until it feels like a breath of fresh air, I feel. It's almost like go, 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 go. I feel you're pushing, you're anxious. You have panic attack after panic attack. You have your essential oils, you know, your blanket, you're, regulating, co-regulating. And then it take a really long time until you feel at peace having a coffee in the morning.
That's true. That's so true. Everything you're saying is true, Cynthia. And that's where I have to say my dad, who was a trauma survivor, and he was driven. He was driven. He was also a perpetrator. He was also very absent. So he was definitely part of the intergenerational transmission of trauma. But he had that kind of resilience, and he never gave up. And I was an endurance athlete. I just knew I have no talent as an athlete, but I have more drive than anybody. I can out-endurance anybody. And I did.
Yeah. Some people feel it's just not worth it. I'm just going to marry someone I'm unhappily with and probably neglect my children as well. They might be aware of it, but they'll get a therapist when they grow up.
Or they'll blame someone else. Blame someone else. That's the default for a lot of people.
Yeah. Let's say a person is at the end of the road in this repairing phase of life where they have done enough repair to be able to enjoy a coffee in the morning. I wonder, what is life after having processed a lot of the trauma? What does life look, or what did it look like for you once you could really enjoy sitting in a park and not feeling you're being chased by a lion?
That is a great question. Sometimes it comes with disbelief. Who is this person? And I can't quite recognize myself. There's a lot of grief for lost time. Like, I have one client she's a little bit younger than me, so she's probably late 60s. I'm 70. She's probably 68. She's been with me for a while, but she had a number of therapists before she came to me who didn't understand about trauma and neglect, so she lost a lot of time in unhelpful therapy before she found therapy that was helpful. So was in a body, she was hugely obese in ways that she really kind of hid out. And I have no fat shaming intention when I say this, because it's really her own experience that she couldn't go out into the world. I mean, she said to me something that I never even thought about because of my own privilege. She said, "Now, I can't believe it. I go on an airplane and I can use the tray table, because before she could never use a tray table because her body took up all the space to the seat in front of her." That is so sad to me. That was her life, so she stayed hidden. And when she was finally in therapy that helped her, and did neurofeedback, and we did neglect-informed work, and little by little, she lost like a third of her body weight. And she has gotten down to a size that is, nobody would think of her as overweight. She's out in the world, this body. She has never had a partner of any kind in her life. So even though she has a wonderful life now, and now she can travel and she has friends, and she can use tray tables, go into a restaurant and not worry about being able to fit in a booth or something, and her life is very different. She has so much grief about lost time. And so, to your point, there's grief, disbelief, and then there's a kind of euphoria about the joy just wells up, and it's like, I just never thought it could be like this. Then I'm so grateful. I practice gratitude all the time. I teach people how important it is to be grateful and to express gratitude. And I really like to especially express gratitude to tech support people, customer service people in these invisible roles who make the world go round and who never really hear anything except for the complaints, whatever's not working, to really see and appreciate the invisible. Because if I can do one little thing to brighten somebody else's day, that makes me happy. And then I feel this real commitment to, I now know that this is possible. So I can tell you, and I always say, we are harbingers of hope. What I can do in the world, I have the experience to prove it, is I come with hope and I come with intention of doing what I can do to make the world better. That's really what I'm on to now, is how can we work with the larger world to stop the trauma? How can we work with the individual and the family to heal the trauma so that the next generation coming in has hope of a different experience than we had? So
They
it's a
don't lose
great
their
question.
they don't lose their first 20 years of their life, or 40 or 50,
Yeah.
trying to understand the first 10. It is very interesting to listen. Gratitude is a byproduct of just having had those tough days of not even being able to focus because you were so anxious because the person you were dating didn't reply, and you almost died from it. So I think that gratefulness is something that not necessarily, sometimes you do have to practice it, fake it till you make it. But more than anything, I really think it's a byproduct of just having experienced one of the worst days of your life.
I think that's true. I think that, Cynthia, I wasn't working out to feel better. I was working out to be skinny, and I was working out to self-regulate, to try and get my nervous system into a state where I could get through the day. And for years, I worked out for like 4 hours every morning because that was the only thing that enabled me to get through the day. And partly because of my crazy eating disorder, I felt like I had to chase calories. So I had to work out. So it was never to feel better, but rather to get to a baseline where I could actually function, regulate myself enough that I was like in some kind of balance or some kind of equilibrium. And now I don't have to if I don't want to. And if I do because I want to, like you're saying.
Beautiful way to put it. I want to move into something more up to date at the minute that I really want your opinion so that you can help me understand. The Epstein files are quite a common theme at the moment. I remember in 2020, I was watching, as a very young girl, I was 22, 23, and I was captivated by how did nobody notice then. And now that we have the proof, most of the girls that came forward as survivors said that they did not feel as if they were a survivor because nothing happened to them. As they said, I willingly went to Jeffrey. And I'm quoting from what I've heard multiple say. Yet people in the public tend to have a very critical eyesight into, were they going for the money because they wanted comfort? So would they really should be seen as victims of this man. But I want you to help me understand why this view is not only foolish, but also very inaccurate, because we all know they were victims.
That's a great question, Thea. My best place to start to answer that question is, again, with myself, because I was sexually abused as a child. Any of us who have histories of trauma and neglect have no self-worth. I felt unattractive. I felt like there was nothing redeeming about me. And so as I got older and I was growing up in the 60s, when we started getting, certainly in the west coast of the U.S., the sexual revolution, we got the pill, we got, abortion was legal, free loves. It started to be more acceptable to be sexual. At the same time that we were on this sort of track of women's liberation, there's this way that sexuality is out in the world commodified and women are objectified. And what I discovered early on is, wow, as a female, being desired sexually makes me feel wanted, makes me feel worthy, makes me feel there's something good about me, makes me feel like, wow, this powerful person or this good-looking guy or this person with money wants me. And so there's a way that it kind of elevates me in my own eyes at the same time that we're talking about women being objectified. There was a way that being objectified and being wanted was so much, about what my starving self-worth wanted. So here's this powerful guy with lots of money who looks at me with desire. It's like there's something dazzling about it. These men, Jeffrey Epstein and all those other really powerful, wealthy men that were the perpetrators, they want me. And so you take these young women and perhaps they have their own trauma and history, or one reason or another, really vulnerable to being wanted, and they're being offered this opportunity for money and being desired and being in these fancy places that they'd never get to go to otherwise. I mean, I know that the woman who wrote the book, there were a number of different reasons. She wanted to be a massage therapist, and she didn't have the money for the training. Somehow she was lured into this situation where she could get money and training as a massage therapist. She got all this other stuff, but it takes a while for this young person who's in the field of all these powerful men and what they want and what they say and how they're interacting with each other. They lose their sense of self and their ability to see what's real. Not only that, but there's a way that the powerful perpetrator is able to really convince the victim or the survivor that is dangerous, makes you bad, makes you rejected, it makes you, everything bad is tied in with speaking out loud about it. Collude in this pact with some other part of their brain that is not their prefrontal. And then it takes years before they're not terrified. These men have a powerful apparatus for coming after people and endangering their lives if they speak. And I don't know what really happened to Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know if he really took his own life. But all I know is that people in high places have a lot of power to eliminate those that do things that might incriminate.
And I wonder what that does to us, to the general public. One thing that I'm starting to see is 3 million files were published and some were taken back. And then we seem to be flooded with this amount of information that I see my amygdala firing over and over and over, which makes me angry and makes me want to do something about it. But at the same time, it's not so long ago that I felt hopeless. Like, I do not fear so much I am fearing that it is out there and we don't do anything about it. Because it must have taken an army of people, powerful, systematically to be able to abuse that many people. And seeing them as if they're not worthy and push them down with silence and with violence, and some of them disappeared. I fear not so much what's out there, but I fear that we don't do anything about it to change it. And I think in our brain, like looking at it from a very neuroscientific lens, I see me going through this loop of anger, but also hopelessness. So what do you think that is doing to the general public?
I can tell you where I'm going with it, and I'll give you a sidebar. And you're too young to know about this person, most likely. But in the 1960s and 70s, there was a freedom fighter, one of the leaders in the Black Power movement. Her name was Angela Davis. She's still living, and she's now 82 years old. And she was in prison as a political prisoner in the U.S. For her work in the Black Power movement back in the 60s. And I had the privilege of going to hear her speak the other day here in San Francisco. She's now 82 years old. She's been through it all. She's been in a federal prison in the U.S. She was number one on the FBI's most wanted list in this country in the 60s. She was that important. The posters about her said, if you see her, don't approach her. She's armed and dangerous, which wasn't really true. But anyway, that's how she was viewed. I heard her speak a couple of months, or probably about a month and a half ago, and I was so inspired because she said two things that really got me. One of them is, we have to generate hope. Not that we look for it, but that we have to generate it. And she said, because without hope, we can't make change. That's what I take with me to heart very deeply. Without hope, we can't make change. There's one other thing that I'll tell you is the direction that I'm on right now. Actually, there's a man who has a website called End Science. His name is Ravi Kumar, and he's an East Indian man. He's a neuroscience guy who's really showcasing trauma lately. We're working on a course. It'll be probably 2027 before we really get this going. But we're really wanting to study male violence, because I think what we really want to do is look at the brain and how does this happen. And I got really interested in looking at some of the perpetrators, like Jeffrey Epstein, like Bill Cosby, like Bill Clinton, like Larry Nassar, some of these really famous perpetrators. What happened? And it's really hard to find childhood background information about these men. Even in AI, it's really hard to get much information because nobody wants to come out looking like they're defending these men. I'm not looking to defend them, but rather, how does this happen? And so many of them, and I did read the book written by Donald Trump's niece about their family. So their histories are about them and where the dysregulation begins. What I do know from Alan Shore, and again, you'll forgive me for being very binary about gender, but he talks about differences between the male brain and the female brain. And the male brain is more vulnerable. And from birth, even when the pregnancy is not particularly eventful, but a normal pregnancy. Male infant is more irritable, more reactive. The female infant, they smile more. They're more receptive to the attachment cues of the parent. They're more regulatable. They are easier to regulate when they get activated than the male child. So the male child is born, grimace more, they fuss more, they're more reactive, they're more sensitive to attachment cues, they require more attachment, require more regulation, they're less able to utilize regulation. When they get traumatized, it's harder for them to recover from trauma. Male brain is more vulnerable. There are particular critical periods. So where I'm interested in working is in how can we prevent this right from the beginning, which is where I want to go back to. And this is, of course, long term. And I'll tell you another thing that Angela Davis said. She's 82. And she said, and this audience was many, many, many ages. I'm 70, and there were people there that were your age and everything in between. And she said, I can tell I'm getting on. I started being able to tell I'm getting on because I would go and speak and people would come to me and they'd say, "Oh, I know about you. I heard about you from my mother." And then the next time around she'd come and people would come to her and say, "Oh, I know about you. I heard about you from my grandmother." So then the next time around, they would say to her, "Oh, I know about you. I heard about you from my great-grandmother." And there were people like that in the audience that were probably your age. I could probably be your grandmother. She could be your great-grandmother. And she said, sometimes it takes 4 generations before we see the change that we absolutely have to give our all to now. So we might not see it, but we have to generate hope. Where I'm interested in going next, and we can't do this alone, which is why it means so much to me, Cynthia, that you are getting this material out in Latin America, because Latin America is so dear to me for so many reasons. And so I'm interested in stopping the macro level. We've got to stop the things like Gaza, Ukraine, like Donald Trump, like who's the Prince of Wales that recently got knocked off the pedestal. We've got to work macro, and we have to do what you and I are doing in our little offices, one-on-one, one-on-two, however many work with at one time. So we have to prevent, and we have to educate. We have to get together so we can do it. Like you and I are doing right now. We're getting together. We found each other somehow across these oceans. We found each other, and here we are working together to educate, prevent, and create a network that spans the whole world. You're over there in UK, you speak to the people in Latin America, you get it out. My book is currently in English and Italian. It's in press in French. The people who are translating it into French are working on the Spanish and the German versions. So we're getting the stuff out there. We have to teach people about what's going on in their brain, what's going on with their kids, and what's going on out there
in the world. I really want to have time for this question, and you will be very humble to admit this, but you're famous. I went to that Oxford conference where everybody was standing up, and I will put the video here because I videotaped it, so people get to see that you're actually very famous. But as someone that was never seen, I really want to understand how it is for you now being so seen.
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of the time, I go into an altered state. First of all,
Okay.
two things. I practice. That talk that you heard me give in Oxford, I practiced that talk. I did 14 different run-throughs of that talk on video, and I would have people come and listen and comment and give me feedback and help me, because of course I didn't trust my own self. And actually, I'll tell you, every bit of feedback that I got, I used, every single bit. So I practice a lot because I'm not used to being visible. Up until just a few years ago, I'm really by nature an introvert, and my experience was working one-on-one or one-on-two or with a therapy group of maybe 8 people and me. So I'm used to being invisible and very quiet. So I go into an altered state with a lot of practice, and that standing ovation you're talking about, I mean, I close my eyes and I open them and those people are still standing. I can't quite believe it. And when we left Oxford and we went to London and we were in the hotel in London, I was so tired and it was so quiet. There's a way that I was so relieved that there was no one there that knew me and that wanted to talk to me, but it's still kind of a split self. And part of me still feels worthless, not good enough, and sometimes gets triggered and I compare myself and I look at other people and I look at me and I see, ooh, I'm not good enough. And then other times I just look at myself and I think, who is this person? And then some of the time I just feel like, don't even go there. You have to do the work. All that really matters is as much time. I'm 70 years old. How much time do I have? I don't know. So I better get as much done as I can. So I need to write books, and I feel, like I have to remember to regulate myself so that so I'm not too tired. So it's a great question because it's about, different parts of the self. Like we were talking about earlier, that little girl who was so invisible and so worthless and felt like I don't matter. She's not gone. She's not gone. And some days she really rears up, and then I have to use my trusted people to help me remember the other parts. That's why we need each other so much, so that we can hold on and stay in present time, because trauma is so powerful.
The last very question is, we started off saying you were driven by pain and fear when you first started your journey when you were 23. What drives you today?
What drives me today is, I think, pain and fear about this world. Because, Alexandra, my friend who works with the children in Gaza, now you're going to forgive me for being emotional and kind of graphic, but she talked about this little girl that she works with, and she showed a picture of her, and she's 4 years old, and her legs are gone. She has 2 little stumps that are bandaged up, and she told the story of this little girl. And this little girl, there was a drone attack, and her father was with her. His father put his body in front of her. She was 4, so that the explosions would not hit her vital organs, so she would be okay. So he put himself in front of her, and he got hit and he died. He collapsed in front of her. She lost her legs. He was on top of her. She was 4. She couldn't move. It took him 3 days to die. So here you've got this little girl, 4 years old, with her father who died to save her life, on top of her, lost her legs. He dies. Fast forward, Alexandra is working with her. And I heard that story and I saw that picture. That is enough pain and fear to drive me for the rest of my life. And when I say this, I'm the child of 2 Holocaust survivors. So all I can say is I am heartbroken and terrified about what's going on out there. I don't want to have a discussion about who's wrong and who's bad. It's heartbreaking. I don't want to speak to that part. My heart is broken and I'm really scared, and that is what...
You're an angel.
Alexandra's an angel too, and follow her too because she is amazing. And when we are in Boston, I feel so privileged that we get to do a program together because she's going to speak about being in the trenches where, to me the other day, she said, you know, there's a ceasefire, but war really isn't over. And she said, but now we're dealing with the acute trauma. And so we're dealing with the acute traumas. Now, I believe, is when we have to come in there with the prenatal, the parents-to-be education, so we can teach people how to make it stop.
Well, may you be blessed. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. You know that I adore you.
Well, I adore you too, Cynthia. I need you to know, and you know this already, but I want all your listeners to know that it means everything to me that you are taking this work out into Latin America. Because Latin America, it's another whole chapter of my story. But Latin America is a very, very important part of my story. So to speak to the people in Latin America, in your language, and I wish my Spanish was good enough that I would feel confident to speak to you in Spanish. I do speak Spanish, but I don't feel confident to do this in Spanish yet. But I so appreciate that you're taking this material out into the Latin American world, because you people, Latin American people, are very precious to me. So thank you all. Muchas gracias for listening to me, and hasta la victoria siempre.
Me encantaría que te pudieras suscribir a este canal, ya que constantemente nos estamos esforzando para hacer la neurociencia y la psicología digerible para el público general. Déjame en los comentarios cuál fue tu parte favorita del episodio, y sin más que decir, nos vemos el próximo domingo.